They said it was fiction. They said it was fear-mongering. They were wrong. Controlling the weather. Rewriting the mind. Experimenting on humans. Watching everyone. For conspiracies. All disturbingly real. Watch carefully. If you're into hidden truths and deeper questions, subscribe. Let's start with a subject that instantly triggers a reaction in many people. The idea that humans could influence the weather. Because if we're honest, weather is one of the last things we've always considered completely natural. Untouchable. Beyond human control. It rains because it rains. Storms happen because they happen. Or at least, that's how it feels. But what many people don't realize is that there are real, documented attempts to influence certain weather phenomena. Not on a global science fiction scale, but locally under very specific conditions. It's called cloud seeding. And the concept is surprisingly simple. If clouds already contain enough moisture, certain particles can be dispersed into them, typically substances like silver iodide, designed to encourage the formation of raindrops or ice crystals. This is important to understand. Cloud seeding does not create storms out of a clear blue sky. It does not generate clouds from nothing. It does not control the weather. It only attempts to increase the probability of a natural process that is already underway. And this is where the conversation becomes interesting. Because from the public's perspective, the line between influencing and controlling can feel very blurry. When people see aircraft crossing the sky, when they notice persistent trails, when weather patterns seem unpredictable, questions naturally begin to form. What's happening up there? Is this normal? Is someone interfering? And this reaction doesn't come from nowhere. It exists because the core idea is real. Cloud seeding is real. It has been used in certain regions for agriculture, drought mitigation, and even hail suppression. But the part that pushes this subject into the realm of conspiracy theories is history. Because there was a moment when weather modification was not just scientific experimentation, but military strategy. Operation Popeye. A program conducted during the Vietnam War with the objective of extending the monsoon season. More rain meant flooded supply routes, impassable roads, and disrupted logistics. Not a myth. Not internet fiction. A program later revealed through declassified information. And once people learn this, something shifts. The discussion is no longer, "That sounds impossible." It becomes, "So they actually tried." And from that point forward, an inevitable question emerges. If it happened then, what else has been attempted since? If it was secret then, what remains undisclosed today? Now it's important to stay grounded. Weather modification does not mean total control over nature. The atmosphere is a chaotic, extraordinarily complex system. There is no switch that turns storms on and off. But the fact that humans can attempt limited intervention is enough to create discomfort. Because the sky has always symbolized something beyond human reach. And the idea that it may not be entirely untouched challenges that perception. Perhaps that is why this topic feels like a conspiracy. Not because every theory is true, but because reality itself is already unsettling. We are not talking about science fiction. We are talking about a world where humans have tried to influence rain. And once you accept that, the next subject becomes even more disturbing. Because if nature became an experiment, what happens when the experiment becomes the human mind? And once you realize the sky was never completely off limits, the next question becomes far more disturbing. Because if humans try to influence nature, what happens when the target is the human mind? Alright. Now we're entering much darker territory. MKUltra, a name that, for a long time, sounded exactly like a classic conspiracy theory. Mind control, secret experiments, the CIA, psychoactive substances. The kind of story people usually associate with movies, not reality. Because the idea itself is deeply unsettling. That a government agency could run experiments on the human mind. That it could test methods of psychological manipulation, disorientation, and behavioral influence. It sounds extreme. It sounds exaggerated. It sounds like a conspiracy. And yet, MKUltra was real. It was an actual CIA program launched in the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War. A period defined by paranoia, fear, and an intense race for technological and psychological dominance. The central fear? That rival nations might develop techniques capable of controlling the human mind. So the question was no longer, is it ethical? The question became, is it possible? The program involved experiments with LSD and other psychoactive substances, tests on suggestibility, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and various forms of psychological manipulation. But the most disturbing part? Many of the subjects had no idea they were part of an experiment. Ordinary people, patients, sometimes even completely unsuspecting citizens. And this is precisely why MKUltra was dismissed for years as just another conspiracy theory. Because the reality seemed too shocking to accept. That can't be true. They wouldn't do that. It's impossible. Until the 1970s, when official investigations began uncovering the existence of the program. Documents, hearings, testimonies, and suddenly something once labeled paranoia became historical fact. Now it's important to stay grounded. MKUltra does not mean that anyone achieved perfect mind control like in science fiction. There were no remote controls for human thoughts. What we're talking about are attempts, experiments, the testing of psychological limits. But the simple fact that such ideas were taken seriously, funded, and conducted in secrecy is enough to change how we view the past. Because we like to believe there are lines that are never crossed. MKUltra revealed that, under certain circumstances, those lines can become disturbingly flexible. And perhaps that is why the subject still creates discomfort today. Not because every theory surrounding it is true, but because the documented core is already unsettling enough. The realization that the human mind, just like the sky, became a field of experimentation. Now we move into a subject that is no longer about mystery or speculation, but about a reality that shocked the world and left a deep scar in history. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. In 1932 in the United States, a medical study was initiated with what was presented as a scientific objective. Researchers claimed they wanted to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. But the true controversy was not just the study itself. It was how it was conducted. Approximately 600 African American men, most of them poor and vulnerable, were recruited. Many were never fully informed about the nature of the experiment. They were told they would receive free medical care. They were treated for what was vaguely described as bad blood. In reality, hundreds of these men had syphilis, and they were not treated. As the years passed, even after penicillin became the standard and effective cure for the disease, the participants were not offered the life-saving therapy. They were not given the full truth. They were not given a real choice. And this is where the story becomes deeply disturbing, because it challenges something fundamental. The belief that medical institutions always act in the best interest of patients. For many people, the idea sounded impossible, unthinkable, like something taken from a dark conspiracy theory. This can't be real. They wouldn't allow this. Not for decades. But in the 1970s, investigations exposed documents, testimonies, and undeniable evidence. The experiment had been real. And it had continued for nearly 40 years. The consequences were not abstract. They were human. Lives damaged. Families affected. Men who suffered and died from a treatable disease. Tuskegee became one of the most haunting examples of what can happen when science becomes detached from ethics. Because medicine at its core is meant to heal, not to observe untreated suffering. And perhaps that is why this subject remains so uncomfortable even today. Not because it is mysterious, but because it is documented reality. A reminder that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to restore. Tuskegee revealed what could happen when institutions hide the truth. Years later, another secret would emerge. This time, about everyone. After years in which the world uncovered hidden medical experiments and secret government programs once thought impossible, another subject emerged that triggered the exact same reaction. Mass surveillance. The idea that government agencies could collect data on millions, even billions of people. For a long time, this concept was dismissed as nothing more than a conspiracy theory. And honestly, it's easy to understand why. Because at first glance, it sounds impossible. How could anyone monitor so many people? What would they even do with that amount of information? Wouldn't that be illegal? In popular culture, such ideas were typically associated with dystopian fiction, science fiction films, or extreme paranoia. A state that sees everything. System that hears everything. It felt exaggerated, unrealistic. But in 2013, that perception changed dramatically. Leaked documents provided by Edward Snowden revealed the existence of programs such as PRISM, Xkeyscore, and Stellar Wind. Real systems designed for the large-scale collection and analysis of digital data. Emails, phone calls, messages, browsing activity, metadata. And what truly shocked the public was not just the existence of these programs, but their scale. Because this was no longer about targeted surveillance of specific suspects. It was about infrastructures capable of collecting vast amounts of information across global digital networks. This is precisely why the subject had once been labeled a conspiracy theory. Because the reality seemed too large, too invasive, too unsettling to accept. Most people viewed the internet as a personal space. Private, almost intimate. The suggestion that digital activity could be systematically collected directly contradicted that belief. That can't be true. This must be exaggerated. It's paranoia. Yet investigations, journalistic reporting, and official responses gradually confirmed the authenticity of the disclosures. Now it's important to remain grounded. Mass surveillance does not mean that someone is personally watching every individual in real time. There is no operator manually tracking each person's daily life. The reality is far colder and far more technical. Data can be collected automatically, filtered, indexed, analyzed by algorithms. And the simple fact that such capabilities exist and have been documented fundamentally changes how we think about digital privacy. Because the concern is no longer, is someone watching me specifically? The real question becomes, how much of my digital life can be stored somewhere? And perhaps that is the most disturbing element. Not the technology itself, but the gap between public perception and revealed reality. Because like many so-called conspiracies before it, this was not pure fiction. It was something hidden until it was exposed. Not every conspiracy is true, but some truths, or once called conspiracies,